Saddam Hussein. The name alone evokes images of tyranny, brutality, and defiance. He was a figure who loomed large over the Middle East, casting a long shadow over the region. He was a dictator who ruled Iraq with an iron fist for over 2 decades. His grip on power was unyielding and his methods were ruthless. His reign was marked by violence, oppression, and war. The scars of his rule are still visible in Iraq today. Saddam's quest for power and regional dominance led him into disastrous conflicts. His invasion of Kuwait in 1990 triggered the Gulf War, bringing international condemnation. These conflicts ultimately resulted in his downfall and left Iraq in ruins. The US-led invasion in 2003 marked the end of his regime. This is the story of his rise, his rule, and his ruin, a tale of ambition, power, and the inevitable consequences of tyranny. Saddam's life was a study in contradictions. He was both a feared despot and a figure of modernization. He was a man who rose from humble beginnings to become the absolute ruler of a nation. His journey from a small village to the presidential palace is nothing short of extraordinary. He was a brutal dictator who was also responsible for modernizing Iraq and improving the lives of many of his people. Infrastructure projects flourished under his rule. He was a cunning strategist who made grave miscalculations that ultimately led to his demise. His overreach and misjudgments were his undoing. Saddam Hussein's life and legacy continue to fascinate and horrify the world. His story is a complex tapestry of ambition, cruelty, and the quest for power. His story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the enduring human cost of conflict. The impact of his rule is still felt by millions. It is a story that remains tragically relevant in today's world. The lessons from his reign are a stark reminder of the perils of despotism. Saddam Hussein was born in 1937 in a village near Tikrit, Iraq, a region that would later become synonymous with his name. He never knew his father and endured a difficult childhood marked by poverty and violence, which left a lasting impact on his psyche. Saddam found a father figure in his uncle, Khairallah Talfa, a fervent Arab nationalist who would shape his early political views. Talfa instilled in Saddam a deep hatred for British colonialism and the Western powers that dominated the Middle East, fueling his desire for Arab unity. Saddam's early life shaped his worldview and fueled his ambition for power, driving him to seek control over his destiny and that of his nation. He joined the Ba'ath Party, a secular and socialist party that advocated for Arab unity and independence from foreign influence. Saddam quickly rose through the ranks of the Ba'ath Party, proving himself to be a ruthless and effective operator, willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. He played a key role in the 1968 coup that brought the Ba'ath Party to power, demonstrating his strategic acumen and political savvy. He became the right-hand man of the new president, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, but it was clear that Saddam had his own ambitions. However, Saddam was the real power behind the throne, orchestrating key decisions and consolidating his influence. He consolidated his control over the government, the military, and the security services, ensuring that his grip on power was unchallenged. In 1979, he forced al-Bakr to resign and assumed the presidency himself, marking the beginning of his brutal and unyielding rule over Iraq. Saddam Hussein wasted no time in consolidating his grip on power. He ruthlessly purged his opponents, real and imagined, from the government and the Ba'ath Party. His secret police, the Mukhabarat, became instruments of terror, silencing any dissent. Saddam's regime was characterized by extreme brutality and repression. Torture, disappearances, and mass executions were commonplace. He used chemical weapons against Kurdish civilians in the north, a horrific act that shocked the world. Despite his brutality, Saddam projected an image of himself as a modernizer and a champion of the Arab world. He invested heavily in infrastructure projects, education, and social programs. He also sought to improve the status of women in Iraqi society. However, these advancements were overshadowed by his regime's systematic human rights abuses and the cult of personality he cultivated around himself. His portrait adorned every public space, and his name was invoked with a mixture of fear and reverence. In 1980, Saddam Hussein launched a disastrous war against neighboring Iran. He believed that Iran, weakened by its Islamic revolution, would be an easy target. He hoped to seize control of the Shatt al-Arab waterway and establish Iraq as the dominant power in the Persian Gulf. The Iran-Iraq War became a brutal 8-year conflict that claimed the lives of over 1 million people. It was a war of attrition, fought with tanks, artillery, and chemical weapons. Both sides committed atrocities, but Saddam's use of chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians drew international condemnation. The war ended in a stalemate in 1988, with neither side achieving its objectives. Iraq was left economically devastated and deeply in debt. Despite this, Saddam declared victory and continued to portray himself as a strongman who had defied the West. Section 5. Kuwait, a costly miscalculation. In August 1990, Saddam Hussein made another fateful decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He ordered the invasion and occupation of Kuwait, a small but oil-rich nation on Iraq's southern border. Saddam justified the invasion by claiming that Kuwait was historically part of Iraq and had been stealing Iraqi oil. He also hoped to acquire Kuwait's vast oil reserves, which would have given him control of a significant portion of the world's oil supply. The international community condemned the invasion and demanded Iraq's immediate withdrawal from Kuwait. The United Nations Security Council imposed economic sanctions on Iraq and authorized the use of military force to liberate Kuwait. Section 6. The drums of war beat again. The United States, under the leadership of President George H.W. Bush, assembled a coalition of over 30 countries to confront Saddam Hussein. The coalition launched Operation Desert Storm in January 1991, unleashing a massive air and ground assault on Iraqi forces in Kuwait and southern Iraq. The Gulf War was a decisive victory for the U.S.-led coalition. Iraqi forces were routed, and Kuwait was liberated within weeks. However, Saddam Hussein remained in power, and his regime survived the war. The Gulf War had significant consequences for Iraq and the Middle East. Iraq was subjected to crippling economic sanctions that devastated its economy and caused widespread suffering among its people. The war also led to the establishment of a permanent U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf region. Section 7. The Walls, Close-in Capture and Trial. In the aftermath of the Gulf War, Saddam Hussein faced mounting international pressure to disarm and comply with UN weapons inspections. The international community was increasingly wary of his intentions and capabilities. He was accused of developing weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs, and supporting terrorist groups. These accusations were based on intelligence reports and his history of aggression in the region. Saddam's defiance and his alleged links to terrorism, particularly after the 9/11 attacks, led to the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. The global atmosphere was tense, and the U.S. sought to eliminate any potential threats. The U.S. government, under President George W. Bush, claimed that Saddam Hussein posed an imminent threat to the United States and its allies. This assertion was a key justification for the invasion. The invasion quickly toppled Saddam's regime, but no WMDs were ever found. This led to significant controversy and debate over the true motives behind the invasion. Saddam himself went into hiding but was captured by U.S. forces in December 2003. His capture marked a significant milestone in the conflict. He was found hiding in a hole near his hometown of Tikrit. The discovery of his hideout was a dramatic moment, symbolizing the fall of his once powerful regime. Saddam Hussein was put on trial by an Iraqi court for crimes against humanity, including the massacre of Kurds in Halabja in 1988. The trial was a pivotal event in Iraq's history, aiming to bring justice for his brutal actions. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. The verdict was met with mixed reactions, reflecting the deep divisions within Iraqi society. He was executed on December 30, 2006. His execution marked the end of an era, but the repercussions of his rule and the invasion continued to be felt in the region. Section 8. A Legacy of Ashes. Saddam Hussein's death marked the end of an era in Iraq, but it did not bring peace or stability to the country. The U.S. invasion and occupation of Iraq unleashed a wave of sectarian violence and instability that continues to plague the country today. The war in Iraq had a devastating impact on the country, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and the displacement of millions more. It also created a power vacuum that allowed extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS to flourish. Saddam Hussein's legacy is a complex and controversial one. He was a brutal dictator who was responsible for the deaths of countless Iraqis. However, he was also seen by some as a symbol of Arab nationalism and resistance to Western imperialism. Section 9. Saddam's ghost still haunts the world. Saddam Hussein's story is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the human cost of war. It is a story that continues to resonate today, as the world grapples with the legacy of the Iraq War and the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. Saddam's brutal reign and his miscalculations serve as a cautionary tale for leaders who seek to rule through fear and aggression. His story highlights the importance of international law, diplomacy, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. The world continues to debate the legacy of Saddam Hussein and the consequences of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. One thing is certain, Saddam's ghost still haunts the world, a reminder of the enduring human cost